When you look at the streets of China's cities, the mix of clothes in the crowds probably wouldn't surprise you. You'd see some people headed to work in their business casual attire, some teenagers hanging out wearing the latest trends in China, and maybe some women headed to a party wearing their tailored, colorful cheapos. China's fashion has developed along with its history, every dynasty, revolution, and societal transformation leaving its unique imprint on the fabric and style of Chinese society. It tends to stay consistent, each imprint as powerful as the next, but the rise of the Communist Party was a significantly large shift. Go back to the 1960s to 1980s and a certain look will dominate in any crowd you see. Considering his vision to form one collective identity, the Cultural Revolution under Mao Zedong's rule reshaped not only the political climate of China, but also the freedom of expression throughout the nation. One way his vision of collective identity was expressed was through the Sun Yat-sen suit, or Mao suit as better known in the West. This suit was a practical garment, as they disagreed with the flamboyance of imperial attire in favor of functional simplicity. This adoption symbolized China's switch from the past and its new commitment to the egalitarian principles of the Communist Revolution. Clothing in Mao's era wasn't extensively analyzed, as there wasn't really believed to be much to analyze. Even so, it was a significant distinguishing factor when looking at China next to other countries, as it held a visible mark of the socialist ideology. After Mao died in 1976, China slowly began to open up to the world once more. Fashion in China didn't begin to see any changes until 1978, the beginning of China's reform era under Deng Xiaoping. A wave of the returned educated youth that experienced internal exile to Xinjiang during the Cultural Revolution had begun flooding back into the rest of China, where they would see the changes and want to catch up with the times. Advertisements for perms, skincare, and makeup began to make an appearance, and stuff from overseas became all the rage for these young adults, as there wasn't much of it around. Along with the four modernizations came a plethora of new commercial and industrial possibilities, with SEZs holding factories to produce export goods. This brought many changes to the textile industry, one significant one being the Guangzhou SEZ contributing to Greater Guangzhou being nicknamed the Blue Jeans Capital, as the factories there manufactured and exported mainly blue jeans, the surplus being sold to Chinese buyers. Of course, Guangzhou wasn't the only SEZ exporting goods. In fact, by 1980, the share of clothing exports across China had more than doubled from 4.8% to 10.1%, with the government beginning to promote ventures overseas in search of new markets. Australia was one of their first targets, proving incredibly successful. The Australians went from making most of their clothes to barely ever making any. When it came to Europe and America, their low labor costs were an irresistible investment to their manufacturers, as what cost $5 an hour in the USA only cost 16 cents in China. By this time, the influence of imports and news in China couldn't go unnoticed, and with it came a new era for fashion. New degrees, university departments, factories, publications, and modeling opportunities were established. In 1983, General Party Secretary Hu Yaobang made the statement, "We must get Chinese people to wear clothes that are a bit neater, cleaner, and better looking." Hu, along with Premier Zhao Ziyang, seen more and more in their Western suits, acted as a means for the masses to begin changing up their closets. Millions of Chinese citizens were changing their style, and within a decade, even farmers were seen in suits. It was a pretty big shift from the 60s, when major domestic suppliers made less than 1 million shirts annually, to 1989, where over 6 million were being produced annually, both for export and local consumption. Not only did the new leaders drive big changes in the trending fashion, but it wasn't uncommon for a wealthier household to own a television as well. These televisions allowed a window into other countries' styles and fashion, and by 1990, the influence of namely Japanese culture, including fashion, was significant among young adults and teens due to famous Japanese films that were aired at this time. The 80s brought many new trends and fashion choices, as well as the first few fashion shows, but unsurprisingly, the majority of China still preferred the Mao suit, especially the older generation. While that wave of returned educated youth and the opening to overseas trade was significant across the younger generation, they were outnumbered by the sheer amount of people unwilling to change their ways. This wasn't helped by the political tensions caused by the student demonstrations of 1986, which further enabled the older generation to keep their blue and gray uniforms. Not only that, but the women of this era had been brought up to regard gender neutrality when dressing, and hadn't had the opportunity to explore their femininity. So, the spread of different fashions was slow and unwelcome by most. There were even times when some trends, such as bell-bottom jeans, would cause others to question the morals of these young adults. Even now, the Mao suit is still worn by Chinese leaders during important state ceremonies, symbolizing the lasting impact Mao and his ideologies have had not only on China's fashion and style, but the government and people as a whole. In 1997, patriotism surged when Hong Kong was returned from British to Chinese sovereignty, leading to a resurgence of the qipao. Though its use had almost died out during the earlier years of the Reformation era and had even been banned at one point, qipao shops began to appear across the country, and it became increasingly popular among Chinese brides as wedding attire. To this day, it is seen as a traditional dress worn to special events or even just dinner parties. The Asian economic crisis in 1997 initially seemed to halt Korean ambitions in China, but around the early 2000s there was a notable revival of economic activity. Korean restaurants became widespread across China. Korean film and pop stars gained massive followings, cosmetic surgery became dominated by Korean providers, and large retail complexes known as Korea cities emerged in major Chinese cities. Along with everything else Korean fashion brands found remarkable success in penetrating the elite market, and the Chinese clothing market saw the emergence of 60 Korean labels by 2005, with many positioned at the top tier of the market. However, by the early 21st century, China had yet to have even formed a fashion industry. The clothing being worn was mainly those from the international fashion industry, or the Mao suit. Many of the clothing companies in China didn't even have a design section at all. Chinese brands faced low recognition among local consumers, and internationally, Chinese brand names had limited pulling power, with China holding less than a 10% share in worldwide brand names exports in 2005. Despite efforts to promote Chinese brands internationally, creating successful labels proved challenging due to low recognition, and the added pressures of the tight control maintained by the Communist Party over interpretations of history and culture limited the creative deployment of a historical aesthetics in fashion, further complicating efforts to establish a distinct fashion identity. Despite these challenges, there were efforts to stage cultural events like Zhang Yimou's performance at the closing ceremony of the Athens Olympics, showcasing elements of Chinese culture on the global stage. But remember the major influence of foreign fashions within China? Well, various subcultures begin to emerge within Chinese society, reflecting influences from Chinese, Japanese, Korean, American, and European cultures. The Great Ha phenomenon is particularly prominent, characterized by teenage girls who follow specific brands, watch particular soap operas, and adopt distinctive styles. The Ha Japan and Ha Korea groups exhibit different fashion preferences, with the former favoring pastels and miniskirts, and the latter opt for larger pants and tops. This influence on fashion from Japan and Korea has only increased since then, along with Tokyo's Shibuya and Harajuku districts, and especially with the growth of K-pop. Then came the Hanfu movement in 2003, which aimed to revive and repopularize traditional Hung outfits. With the desire to reclaim cultural pride and self-respect, the movement is focused specifically on Hung culture. Today, the latest Chinese fashions are very prominent on the Chinese version of TikTok, Douyin. Douyin fashion and makeup, which has now become somewhat of its own category, is a term that embodies the latest trends of makeup and fashion in China. It consists of much Japanese and Korean style and influence, as well as many cultural fashion statements, including videos of elegant qipao, even showing how to walk and act while wearing them, and hanfu, with intricate detail, along with culturally significant makeup and hair accessories to go with it. From the simplicity of the Mao suit to the vibrant mix of global and traditional influences seen today, China's fashion journey reflects its dynamic history. Together they embody a nation embracing its past while confidently stepping into the future, crafting a unique identity on the world of fashion. Thanks for watching!